Guys, in the last lesson, you were reading a story titled The Most Dangerous Game. And one of the things that you were supposed to do was work with a plot map. We've been working with plot maps, but we have not been discussing your plot maps. In the next lesson, not today, but in the next lesson, we will. Because the day of the test is quickly arriving. I don't think that we're going to have a test next week, but I think that the week after next week, you can anticipate having a test, your first test. So we're getting there. And as I told you, one of the things that will be included in your test will be a plot map. So you have to be the master and commander of plot maps. Very quickly, I just want to ask you, and you should be able to answer also very quickly, what are the elements that go in each part of a plot map? You know that in a plot map, we have the first part, which is the introduction or exposition, the second part, which is the raising action or complication. Then we have a climax on the top, and then we have a denouement or falling action. What information is supposed to appear in the introduction? Only three pieces of information. Which are they? In the introduction, we have the main character, the name of the main character. That piece of information goes there. The setting, which is the when and the where of the story, and also what the conflict is. What is the problem that this individual, this protagonist, has to solve? That is the information that goes in an introduction. If you add anything else, you're writing more than you're supposed to, because that's all that goes there. Who can tell me what goes in raising action? What happens to the conflict in a story? No, but not always does it get resolved. Sometimes the protagonist fails. But there's something that will always happen to the problem. Exactly. That's called complication. So what goes in raising action is how that problem, how that conflict that our protagonist is trying to solve increases and gets worse. What happens to the character in that process that occurs up all the way up to the moment of the climax? So the information that goes there is the bulk of the story, because of the bulk of a story, the biggest chunk of any story will always be the raising action of the complication, which is something that I mentioned also several times. What is a climax? Who can tell me what a climax is? I'm just reviewing here. Okay, the climax is the moment where we know the outcome of the story, and then we have the falling action, which is the opposite of raising action. We're tying up loose ends and say how the story ends. But guys, this is something we should be mastering because we're already in our fifth week, and we have to like get very, very good at this. Very good. Okay, we're dealing with story structures. Okay, in today's story, uh, and oh, by the way, before we go to today's story, in our next lesson, and I'm announcing this so you will all be prepared because I'm going to be calling all of you. Uh, I want to discuss the plot map for the most dangerous game, and for this one that we're going to be reading today, which is called Disguises. Okay, in Disguises, we have the story of a Chinese woman that lives in New York. She doesn't know English. And when you live in a place where you don't know the language, that creates situations that can be scary. I would like to ask you guys, have you ever been lost in a place and you had trouble communicating? Had that happened to any of you? I always ask this question to my students, and I've heard some very interesting stories. And I would like to hear from you. Has that ever happened to you? Anyone? Okay, the question is, have you ever been lost? And while you were lost, you had some type of trouble communicating with other people, because when you get lost, what do you want to happen? Stop being lost, right? You don't want to be lost anymore. So when we're lost, we sometimes ask for like directions or things like that, or ask for help? Has that happened to any of you? Mesalas, you were never lost in Walmart, and you. What was that again? No. What about you, Miss Recio? You were going to say something. What happened? Tell us. Tell us the story. Give us the juicy bits. Okay. How did you feel? Was it more sadness or was it more fear and terror? I'm sorry. Fear. Fear. Okay. Yeah, it's scary. It's gonna be. You said you were 8. Something similar happened to me when I was 5 in New York in Macy's. The Macy's, not one of these Macy's that they have here in Puerto Rico, another place, the original one. But I'll save that story for another time. But being lost can be terrifying. Now, imagine being lost in a place and you cannot communicate with people for whatever reason. One of the reasons could be that you don't know the language. The story is about a person that is experiencing the feelings that are associated with being lost and how shocking it can be. Sometimes it can be a very transformative event. It can mark a person being lost. It can be a very scary thing, not just for a child, but for an adult too. The literary concepts that we are going to be exploring in this story are chronological order, which is the events in a narrative that occur in time order. Chronos means time in Greek, and chronological means that the order is in time. A flashback is something that we will also be exploring. The flashback is an interruption of the flow of the narrative when we see scenes that occur in the chronological path of the story and they present information that serve to clarify either plot points or characterization issues like motivation and things like that. So imagine the story moving like in a line. That will be chronological order. And then it stops, it jumps backward to before the time it began, and we see a scene happening there for a while. And then the story jumps back into where it left and continues. Well, that would be chronological order. And you guys, I'm sure, I'm sorry, that would be flashback. And I'm sure you guys are familiarized with this storytelling technique. Something else that you will be dealing with in the story with a sequence of events chart like this one that you're supposed to be working on while you read. Not after, not before, but during your reading, as you're reading the story, you're supposed to have that chart next to you. And you're going to take notes of the flashbacks as per the chart that you're seeing there. You're just going to do it one time because you already have one example there of how it is supposed to be done. Guys, another of the concepts that you're going to be dealing with in the story, or issues, not concept, but issues, is that of sweatshops. Do you know what a sweatshop is? I heard the term for the first time in the 1980s. Does anybody know what a sweatshop is? Sweatshop. The first time I heard about a sweatshop was, as I told you, I was watching news, and the news were about a fire in New York. It was pretty horrible because this is what happened. The fire was in an abandoned building, abandoned. So they got there, the building pretty much burned. The firemen put the fire out as well as they could. They noticed a smell that was peculiar. So they entered the building, and in part of the building this was this big door, this gigantic door, one of those doors that you roll to the side. It was made of metal. So they, and it was chained. So they broke the chains off, They opened the door and the stench was overwhelming. They walked into this gigantic, this very large room, like a warehouse, and what they discovered there were people that were burned alive. They were tied to their ankles with chains to bunk beds, and also in the area there were sewing machines. Basically, what they had there were a bunch of immigrants. They were illegal, and they were brought in from, I believe, China, also like in this story, from China into New York, and they were working as slaves. A sweatshop is like a factory, a small factory where people are treated as basically as slaves. Some people that want to immigrate illegally to another country, they don't have money. These people, what they do is some people, they offer them to help them with the trip, but then they have to pay back. And sometimes the way that they pay back is like being a slave for a time, working at a sweatshop. How many of you have ever heard of this kind of situation before? Not necessarily the fire, but these type of factories that they also put in other countries, and they make people work for very, very, very little money. Chances are, I don't know how many of you are wearing Nike sneakers. Nike, anyone? Oh, I don't know if you've heard anything about Nike, but Nike, they've been like called out for that. Nike's been called out for that for having people doing forced labor to make their sneakers. And you want to see all about it, all you have to just go to YouTube and you can find a bunch of videos about that. And I saw an interview with a guy that worked in one of these places. He was like in his 20s, a young guy. And I think it was in Southeast Asia. I don't know if it was Vietnam or Laos or Cambodia, one of these countries. The guy had never worn shoes in his life. In his life. And he was making sneakers that cost $150, $160 because that's what you guys pay for sneakers, right? So, Mikael, what do you think about that? Wearing sneakers that were probably made by a slave. That happens, and it's happening right now. So, in this story, our protagonist, you'll see. Okay, there's some vocabulary words that you're going to have to uh, find a synonym for. And you know that a synonym is a word that means the same thing, had the same meaning. The words are lurched, rancid, desolate, and insistently. You're not going to make sentences of these words. You're going to find a synonym. What other word could you substitute these words for? And then, of course, you are going to read story beginning on page 40 of your book all the way to page 52. On page 53, you have an assessment, an applying your skills section that you will be completing with a plot map. So in our next lesson, we're going to be discussing the plot map of Most Dangerous Game and the plot map of Disguises. By the way, have any of you been to a subway before? Before I leave? Anyone? El tren urbano de Puerto Rico, the one we have here. That's not a subway, that's a train. Subway goes underground. Yeah, like the one in New York. That's a subway. You know, it goes underground. How many of you have been to the one in New York? You have. Okay, and what's the most memorable aspect of the experience? Okay, you know what I always remember when I was little in New York? The smell. The smell. It's always like stuck with me. I remember the smell very vividly. and it's not a good memory. Not good at all. And I would take it occasionally, not frequently, but occasionally we would take the subway to go places because in New York most people don't have cars, and and most cities around the world mass transportation is how things roll. Well, guys, I'll let you go then. Have a great day, and I'll see you. Today's Wednesday, Friday. God bless you.